indeed, I will talk about mapping slavery today, which is a research project initiated in 2013 at the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and initiated by Dean Colonius, who teaches history there. It comprises of an aggregation of practices that both Black and white women, historians, and cultural heritage professionals were involved in and are involved in. And so central to mapping slavery as a public history project is the mapping and thus visualizing of the Dutch history of slavery as it unfolds in the Dutch metropole. And so considering the Dutch colonial empire in Asia, Africa, and the Americas as one analytical entity, in the Dutch colonial project and its afterlives as a continuum through connecting colonial history and current race relations, which is an under-researched topic in the Netherlands, are premised starting points within the project. And our work involves empirical research and methods such as reading the city as an archive and mapping. And so two of several founding elements for the Mapping Slavery Project came from the Dutch cities of Utrecht and Amsterdam. In Utrecht, I myself worked as a curator in public spaces, indoors and outdoors, such as libraries and municipal corridors, shops, churches, garages, even parks, streets. And I started a 2-year project called Traces of Slavery in Utrecht, together, for instance, with, among other people, with historian Esther Captain. And one of the things that we did was launch a walking tour in 2011. And Esther Captain published an accompanying walking guide in 2012, which traces the city's history of slavery and empire. And so the project in Utrecht was an intervention because Utrecht was not associated with the history of slavery at all. It's the fourth city of the country. It's a very white city. It's very progressive, very much a university town, if you will. And so the history of slavery is typically related to Amsterdam. And so the guidebook by Esther Captain and the overall project that I did became one of the blueprints for the Mapping Slavery project. Another founding element was the work of Jennifer Tosh, who started her Black Heritage Tours, Amsterdam tours in 2013 in the city center of Amsterdam. And through her storytelling and walking past numerous streets, monuments, and buildings, sort of a new layer of Dutch and Amsterdam history unfolds, which even to Dutch ears and eyes is quite surprising to many. And so Jennifer Tosh teaches people to look at Amsterdam anew. And so both Tosh and I are women of color, Black women, if you will, and we're both navigating the city and reading the city as an archive in order to narrate a story that was coded in silence. And we did public interventions as Black women who were narrating a different story while embodying the story that we were telling. And the storytelling and navigation through the city is an embodied practice. Our bodies are connected to the stories and therefore mostly not experienced as neutral, quote unquote, or objective in ways white people supposedly can practice neutrality or objectivity on this topic in the Netherlands. And simultaneously, we both purposely position ourselves in the story. Positioning, which is often a scary or difficult concept for many people, I would say, is done in order to emphasize the importance of locating oneself also in this larger story, something that feminist theorists have taught us. And so in our work for Mapping Slavery, we map, we research, we narrate, and visualize both material and immaterial traces of the history of slavery in the Netherlands. The research we do is both empirical, as we look into written and visual archival material, but as I said before, we also view the city as an archive, reading its traces in monuments, in gable stones, in tombstones, in churches, even in graveyards. And these stories and traces are translated into data for physical and digital maps, including text entries, which then can function as a baseline for published guidebooks, walking tours, but also even theater productions or podcasts. And so, as such, our work involves multiple layers of thinking and producing. And so the act of mapping is important for us because of the visualization it involves. We make something really tangible that has been silenced and made invisible, rendered invisible for a long time. And also, instead, we create kind of a counter map because mapping, if you look at the colonial project, was an important aspect of that colonial project. And in the 17th century, the work of map makers was a crucial technology necessary to understand, navigate, and conquer the world. And so, what was not mapped in those days were the violent migratory movements that more than 1 million Asian and African people endured under Dutch control. They were enslaved, sold, bought, transported, and held by the Dutch during colonial times from the early 17th or even 16th century up until. There was a silence in the daily rhetoric of the Dutch mainstream and an absence in the Dutch historical accessible knowledge production on the centuries-long involvement in colonial slavery by the Dutch. And yet, there were all these visual remnants which often remained unseen. And so by gathering these data and mapping them, we try to debunk the notion of Dutch colonialism, including slavery, having taken place somewhere else, out of sight and therefore out of mind, hardly a part of Dutch history. Well into the 21st century, slavery was not considered an integral part of Dutch history. And even if it was, Dutch people often refer to it as being a mere black page in a larger colonial story, which actually brought the Dutch on, originating from a great Dutch character trait, the VOC mentality. And as we map, we are filling in the colonial blankness in Dutch space, onto the Dutch map, into our Dutch canon, refusing to hail the Golden Age. And this is quite necessary because in March 2020, YouGov, a UK-based research company, conducted research in 7 European countries and Japan, and they concluded that 50% of the Dutch are still quite proud of their colonial heritage, the highest percentage of the countries that were researched, higher even than the Brits. And so visualizing it is also for us something to move to something that is yet unseen into being seen, basically. And I'll stop there.